So once again, to those of you just joining us, I want to welcome you to Visual C Sharp Soup to Nuts. This is part 17 of the 22-part series, and today's episode is entitled C Sharp and Windows Applications. Very pleased to present you to William Steele. He's developer evangelist at the Microsoft Corporation. William, take it away.
Thank you. Welcome today to this webcast. Let's see here. Let me cancel out of what I was doing here and get back over to that. Today we are talking about Windows applications, and specifically Windows Forms-based applications. We're going to be looking at the form object and playing around with it, seeing what kind of things we can do there. We'll learn about the basics of a form app, which we've been seeing all along, and then we'll learn some actual useful information. Add on to the form, make it do some things for us that you see a lot of standard applications do. And then we'll move in at the very end and move into a little more advanced session that will lead us up to next week, where we can actually start really taking advantage of what Windows Forms are capable of. So to start off with, a quick little agenda. We'll look at the system.windows.form object itself and look at the Windows Form application model itself. We'll then move into different features of the Windows Forms. Specifically, we'll look at the eventing model and the layout model. And then we'll start adding features to our form, like menus, and lastly, we'll finish it up with some graphical items. So to start off with, let's talk about system.windows.forms. That is the namespace where the form object that we're dealing with, the base class called the form that we're dealing with, lives. So naturally, if we're going to be building an application, we're going to have a reference to the system.windows.forms namespace, and then we'll also have a using statement in our code that will basically allow us to get access to, without having to type the very long names for the namespaces, all the objects in that. Some of the things that we're going to be looking at when we first off open this up, and some of the things we've seen in the past, are the basic form object itself. That's the rectangle, battleship gray, with the minimize, maximize, and close. All of those features come from the standard Windows Form object. In other words, they are inherited from that object. And we can see that in our code once we create a form object. We can then start adding controls to our forms through various mechanisms. We can either use code to do it, or we can simply use the Visual Studio Designer and drag out a control and drop it onto our form surface. And once we do that, we can then start wiring up things like events and properties that we would like to set on those controls or respond to based on actions that those controls actually receive from the user. And we've seen events before. We've seen properties. We covered those in previous sessions. But in this case, instead of applying it to a business component, we're actually applying it to a visual component that actually is a part of the form. One of the things that I'm going to show you is that there is a mechanism that allows us to actually know when the form is actually going to be destroyed. In other words, when it's being unloaded. And we're going to take actions against, when that occurs, to help clean up our applications. It's important that if you are actually talking to a business component beyond your own application, say you're talking to a mainframe, or say you're talking to a database, and you'd like to actually have the system close the connection down correctly without it just dropping away, you can actually trap some events within the Windows Form object that allow you to do that. There's also a method called dispose that gets called every time the application closes down that will fire, that will allow us to not only hook those events, but also to clean up other things within our own applications. So let's go ahead and pop into a demo here. We'll take just a quick tour around the Windows Form object, and we'll add a little bit of code to it, and we'll see how things start responding to us. One of the things that I want to point out is that my screen resolution is set to 1024 by 768. So if you have your screen resolution set to that or higher, then if you have pressed the F5 key in your live meeting window, that'll maximize your display so you can see my entire screen. And then when I'm done with the demo, you can press the F5 key again, and that will return you back to the normal live meeting window. So onto my demo machine. The first thing that you'll see here is my blog. A couple of you were asking where you can get the previous sessions for this. Every one of the sessions in this webcast series is documented here in this blog. You can click on the link for the title of it, and that will actually take you out to the Windows webcast page where you can actually sign up for the webcast and actually download the video of the webcast. In addition to that, each one of them, just like today's, has an attachment attached to it that contains the demo code. So if you're interested in following along my code today, you can actually just download this zip file right here and start, open that up and follow along the code right in there. So let's pop back over to Visual Studio. I'm now in C# Express, and what I've done is I've created a very, very simple Windows Form application. I've not done anything to it except change the title of the form, Windows Forms Rock. I might have done a little bit of resizing as well. The Windows Form object itself is actually a class. And if I switch over to the code view, you see that it is a partial class. In other words, part of the class exists in one file and part of the class exists in another file. And we'll see that in just a second as well. But the basics is I've defined my class, and I'm calling it Windows Forms here. I can call it whatever I want to at this point. But it does inherit from the form object. And the form object comes from the system.windows.forms namespace, which obviously has been referenced over here in my project itself. So this allows me to get access to that functionality. This allows me to actually get access to the items within it without having to type the entire namespace out every time. So I am inheriting from this form object. And as I mentioned, this is a partial class. We see in our project, we see a Windows Form.cs file. And when I double click on that, that brings up the Visual Designer. However, if I expand this out, we can see behind it there's a Windows Form.designer.cs, another C# file, that if I double click on, you will see is the other half of that partial class. And inside here is that dispose method that I was talking about. There's some other items inside here of interest. If you're not familiar with C# or the way C# actually builds Windows apps, in fact, everything that it does is in C#. So everything that you see on my Windows Form right here is actually represented in C# in this Designer CS file. So if I expand out this hidden section here, the Windows Form Designer generated code, when I expand this out, you can see inside here that we've got a few items already going on. I mentioned I changed the size of the form, and there it's actually, we can see the client size line here that defines the size of that actual window. We see the name of the window, and we also see the text that I placed at the top called Windows Forms Rock. So that's been added there inside this designer code. Now every time I add something to this code, let's take a label control for example, and just drag this label control out onto the form. There, let's get that placed there. We'll move this back over to there. You'll notice that when I go to the designer code, what happens is it automatically added the methods to handle the label control. So here where it's created the new label control, and then it's also added a group where it's actually set all the properties for that particular label control. So in this case, we can go ahead and change the name and say Hello World. I'm sorry, this is the text property. So when we switch back, we'll see the text Hello World on our form. Now some of the other controls that are available in here, if you look in the toolbox, there's actually quite an array of tools that's available. We've played with the button controls, we've played with text boxes and labels and things like that. But there's some really powerful controls. For example, calendar controls, progress bars, so you can display progress dialog boxes. We even have some very advanced controls like the tree view control and the web browser control. If I wanted to, I could actually drag the web browser control, place it on my form, and simply by placing it on the form, I can then add a URL property to that, or set the URL property of the web browser control, and it will display that web page right inside that control. That's a very, very handy control if you're building web-based applications, but would like a Windows client container. Some of the other important features of the Windows Forms are some of these what we call collection controls, things that contain other controls. So here we can have a group box or a panel These kinds of controls allow you to place multiple controls inside them, and they will handle layout of controls and things like that. In the next demo, I'm actually going to show you how to do this manually, but if you wanted to do it automatically, you could use these controls as well. Some of the most important features, and we actually have a session coming up in a few weeks on it, is the data controls. The ability to actually just grab a hold of a data grid, for example, and just drag it and drop it onto our form and allow us to do, placement of automatically connect up to data sources and do whatever we want to there. Very powerful controls simply by dragging and dropping. I like some of these hidden controls that are here. There's actually some component controls. And what we mean by component is these actually don't actually display anything at runtime, but they're there available for us. For example, we can add connectivity to a serial port. So if we want to talk to a GPS or talk to some other device that uses a serial interface, we can do that here. I like this timer control. I'm just going to take the timer control and drop it on the form, and you'll notice that as I drop it on the form, it doesn't display anything on the form itself, but instead it displays it in this lower window outside of the form. And that allows us to do some interesting things. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable that timer control and set its interval to 1,000 milliseconds. So basically, this is going to tick every second. And then what I can do is I can double-click on the timer control to bring up the event handler for that clock or that timer control that ticks every second. And that's a pretty nifty little feature there if you're doing games or you're doing any type of application that needs to have some kind of time awareness or checking, every 5 seconds I want to check for the state of something. The timer control is great for that because it really doesn't take away from what your app is doing at that point. I can then go ahead and set some other properties on this. For example, in this case, every timer tick, I'm just going to go ahead and update the text of that label control to say the time is, and then we can actually display the time. In our case, it's going to be, we're just going to go to the date time object, spelled the other way, and we'll go to, which is now, and then we're going to convert that to some kind of a time string. So let's just go ahead and take the long time string. So basically what I've done now is I've assigned the label with this string, the time is, plus the current time string in the long format. And this is going to fire every second. In my actual Windows form, we can see that there's nothing on the code that would represent, nothing that would tell us in the form that there's a timer there, but we can see it down below here. We do have it enabled, so when I go ahead and run this, it will go ahead and fire up the instance of my form. And for about a second, we're going to see the text "Hello World," but then we'll see that "Hello World" text actually changes as it's running, and there you can see it, and there the time has changed. So now it's displaying the time. So it's 12:17:46 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time where I'm at right now. So one other thing that I do want to point out is that we talked about that dispose method. The application shutting down by itself triggered the timer to go away. However, if we wanted to be correct about this, what we could have done is gone up to this dispose method, and inside here, if there are components, we could actually have told the clock to go ahead and stop the timer control. So this .timer .enabled equals false would actually set this up to turn off the timer. This would actually disable the timer before everything gets shut down. That way we don't accidentally fire in between the time we actually closed the app and the time it actually exited out, because there is going to be a slight delay in there. So this is a good instance of where we would want to shut down or clean up some of our code that we didn't before. Also note that down here we've also added a few other items inside here. Here you can see the timer control itself, and we're using the standard event handling procedure. Remember how we looked at this a few weeks ago, where we're using the timer tick plus equals. This is adding the delegate handler to this. So we're adding this clock timer tick method, and the timer tick method actually exists in the other file here. This method right here is the one that we're referencing here. So this is the standard event handling, events and delegates session that we covered a couple weeks ago. You'll notice that Forms actually uses just the exact same methods. And then down here you can see the actual two controls that we added. The label control and the timer control are both actually referenced here as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and pop back over, and we'll move into a little bit more advanced session. Don't forget, you can ask any questions at any time using the questions and answers panel. After every demo here, I will go through and answer all those questions for you. So let's talk about laying out of our controls. Now, it's pretty nice when we have a Windows form out there and you draw it and you position everything, all the controls where you want them. But sometimes you're going to run into a situation where somebody's screen resolution is a little different than yours, or the application needs to change size for whatever reason. So in those cases, you're going to want to have a mechanism that allows your application to dynamically update itself and update the layout of the controls so that they actually fit in the correct locations whenever you need them to. And there's a couple ways that you can do this. We have a mechanism called anchoring that you can actually anchor a control, which will basically pin it at its current location, a specified distance from an edge or like the top or the bottom. And you basically will draw the control where you want it, and then you tell it, I'd like it to maintain this position regardless of what the resizing is. And we call that anchoring, and you can anchor the top, the left, the bottom, and the right of the sides of the control to the top, left, bottom, and right sides of the form. Another mechanism is what we call docking. Docking allows you to actually pin the entire control to one side or the top or the bottom or another. In that case, instead of it being a specified position, a specified distance away from an edge, a docked control will actually touch that edge. It's always going to move to that edge. Regardless of what you do with the form, that control will always move around and stay in relation to that edge. It's important to understand that you cannot have anchoring and docking combined, at least on the same sides, because docking will always set the edge to the very edge of the edge of the control to the very edge of the form, where anchoring will maintain the position. So in effect, docking is always going to override what your anchoring is. You can also respond to some of the custom events that are available on either the Windows Form object or on the actual controls themselves. There is a layout event that fires on the controls that allows you to specify, overriding of the standard features that allows you to respond to, custom events or, resizing events or things like that that would actually indicate to your application that it needs to reposition a control. And they're pretty easy to respond to. Let me just go ahead and pop back out of here and we'll do a quick demo on that. So back over into my forms design here. Let's just go ahead and drop a control out here that would help us. I had that data grid out here. Let's just go ahead and put that thing back out there. Data grid. We'll just place that on there. You'll notice that when I move the controls around here, I get these little lines. This one's above the word hello world. This one would be below it. It's basically telling me where my controls lined up in relation to other controls. So that helps me position controls a little easier. In this case, I'm not going to go ahead and choose a data source. We're going to get to that in a couple weeks. But this is where the control is. You can see the dark area, and you can see it's a defined position away from each edge. If I go ahead and run the application at this point, what we're going to see is that we're going to have this grid with nothing in it. The timer is continuously working. As I move this around, the grid maintains its current position. So it doesn't redraw itself or anything like that. It just stays exactly where it's at with no additional input. Now the reason it's staying there is because when I check on this grid itself, we'll see that if I scroll down and look at the anchor property, that it's by default anchored to the top left of my form. If I wanted to, I could actually change this, and you can see I'm just turning the anchor controls on and off by clicking the side icons here. And now when I go ahead and run this control, or run this application again, instead of it being pinned to the top and the left, it's actually going to move with the corner because it's pinned to the bottom and the right. So that control moves with the actual movement of the Windows form itself. Now that is an anchor. In other words, it's going to stay the same distance from the edge every single time we run it. If I wanted to, I could override the anchor by actually choosing what we call dock. And if we go down and choose the dock, you notice it's set to none right now. And this one, when I click on the drop-down, I get a slightly different view. I get a dock that allows me to move it to the top, the left, the right, the bottom, as well as center it across all of them. You notice that when I center it across all of them, it fills up the entire screen. If I go to the top or the bottom, it's basically going to move itself to those positions along these edges, and it will maintain those positions when I run it. So it's sort of like an anchor to three sides. However, there is no vertical resizing of it, and there is no margin between those. So that is the docking feature and the anchoring feature. Let me just go ahead and turn that back off using the none. That puts that back in the middle. And then we can also do a couple other things. For example, in the form control itself, we can actually switch over to the events of this control. And we can see that in the events, there's that layout event. And here's the layout event. And as I double-click on this event handler, that will create the code for me, the event handler code necessary to actually allow me to respond to that. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to check to see if the data grid control, which is the control we're referring to, if its height actually drops below, for whatever reason, 100 pixels, then we can actually force the control to reset its height. And to force the control to reset its height, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to force the form to reset its height as well. So we're going to set the height of the form itself equal to 200 pixels, which is going to be large enough to actually handle this control as well. And then we'll go ahead and tell the control itself to keep its size, its minimum height for the control itself, to 100. If the control height ever falls below 100, it'll maintain 100. Now we're not going to see anything here when I run this because the actual control height is always going to stay larger because of the way we anchored it. However, what I can do is if I go back to my form designer here and I anchor all four sides, by anchoring all four sides, what's going to happen is the form is actually going to resize, or oops, I made a mistake there. See what my little mistake was. There we go. Now we'll run that. So now when I actually change this, you'll see the data grid actually changes in size in relation to the window. You'll also notice that what just happened there is when I moved beyond, when I got the data grid height to less than 100 pixels, it actually stopped me from making it any smaller. In this case, you can see my cursor is actually moving up the side of the form, but the actual form will not, it refuses to get any smaller. And the reason it's doing that is because my code is preventing the form from getting any smaller. So in that case, I have the ability to override what the user or what the window is actually trying to do. And I can do that simply by adding a handler that understands the minimum height requirements in my application. Okay, so let me pop back over to our code here, our demo. And let's talk about another feature that applications have, and that's menus. Menus are basically the file menus across the top. You get file, edit, window, view, all of those types of menus. In Windows Forms, it's common to have those in an application. So adding them to our application should be easy, and in fact, it is quite easy to do that. However, there are some menus that are a little bit more advanced. A lot of people aren't aware that they can actually create a menu called a context menu that allows you to handle things like the right mouse clicking of a form. So when you right mouse click on it, you can pop up a context menu. And we've actually got a separate type of menu control for those context menus. Now the menu system within C# is actually pretty powerful. It allows you to do not only the standard menu items, but it also allows you to build submenus underneath those. And you can hide and show those pretty much at will. And there's also a lot of other nice features. For example, you can have default settings in there. You can also add icons like check marks and other images. You can actually have different states of menu items. And in fact, you can do more than just check marks or just a single item. In some menus, you can actually set up combo boxes, drop-down combo boxes that allows you to pick up, pick different items in there, or add items with images. You can even do some really cool things like take advantage of stuff I'm going to show you in the next section, where you can add like transparency to images and things like that. So the menu system is very powerful, and it's relatively easy to use as well. So let me go ahead and pop back out there, and we'll go ahead and add some menus to our application, and we'll see just how powerful they can actually get. So I have my Windows Form app here, and in this case what I'm going to do is under the Tools menu, whoops, if I can get to it, there we go. We've got some common controls for containers. Notice that we have the menus and toolbars. In this case, I'm actually just going to drag out a menu strip, and I'm going to drop it right on my application. When I drop it on there, it places it automatically at the top here, but it also adds the menu strip icon to the bottom, similar to the way the timer control was. So it's kind of done it in two ways. Once I have it there, the designer allows me to simply type in the menus, so I can do a file and an edit here. And in this case, notice that we have file, but there is no hotkey. To add a hotkey to a menu, I simply add the ampersand to the front of it. So here you can see F is now the hotkey for this. Same thing with the edit. We'll just add the ampersand in front of the E, and that allows us to get the hotkeys for our menus. Now I can go ahead and start adding submenus to these. So file, save, open. I'm going to add a hyphen here. The hyphen is actually going to turn into a separator bar, and then I can just type the word exit. And I'm going to put a hotkey under the X to allow us to actually choose Alt-X, Alt-F-X I should say, to actually exit out of the application. And that's a really simple menu there. So we get save and open and exit. And then we've added the separator bar, that was that hyphen. And if I want to handle these events, I can simply double click on the code, and that will actually bring up an event menu handler for that particular item. So in this case, it's the exit tool strip menu. And in my exit tool strip menu, I can do something like application.exit. So now when I run this application, instead of choosing the closing the form through the X, I can do a file exit, and the application will exit at that point using the application exit. Now there's some other features that I can do there. For example, in my form designer here, I might have some cool feature that I want to add to it. So I can add my cool feature, and in my cool feature, I can actually specify that this control here, though it is a cool feature, is actually going to be a control that deals with a check marks. So here we're going to choose the check on click, and I'm going to turn that to true. And when I do that, we're going to see the application, the edit menu is not checked, but when I click on it, now we'll see the edit menu is checked. There's a checkbox next to it. So I can turn that on and off simply by clicking that. And when I do that, I can then, again, just like I did before, double click on this and actually respond to the state of that, and simply by saying something like message box show, and in this case our cool feature is, and then we'll just actually ask the control what its state is. There it is. So we're just asking what its check state is. So we're just basically saying display the check state of this control. And now when I run this, whenever I click on that item, it's going to display a small dialog box telling me that the cool feature is checked or the cool feature is unchecked. And we actually get that property right in that control. In addition to that, we have the ability to take our controls and let's say, for example, I can add a new control here. Let's just call this test, and right mouse click on this. You notice that I can actually convert these items to various things, text box or a combo box. A combo box allows me to add a feature and then go through and add the items to the collection. So, item 1, item number 2, and item number 3 actually become the properties of my actual control. So when I run it, I get a menu with a drop-down control inside it that allows me to actually change the features. And here you can see that by selecting that, I can then go ahead and do something with that, and the item stays in there. Now we talked about the pop-up menus. Let's go ahead and add a pop-up menu to this control here. To do that, I'm simply going to go out to my menus. Instead of choosing the menu strip, I'm going to choose the context menu strip, drop that out on here. In this case, I can do my, item 1, item 2. It doesn't make any difference what you do. This context menu strip, though, as I click off of it, goes completely away. I can then go ahead and click on my control, and on my control we actually have a context menu strip property that allows me to choose which context menu I would like to be displayed for a particular control. So in this case, the context menu will only exist for this control. And now when I run this, what we're going to get is that context menu pop up only when I right mouse click on that control. If I right mouse click anywhere off of it, I don't get that control, but when I'm on that control, I get the nice context menu. And then I can click on the items, and that would actually execute any event handlers that I had associated with that. So let me add one more little bit of code to this. We saw before, I did this application exit. And one of the things that we were playing around with was, or we're talking about, was making sure the application cleaned up correctly. Now, in this case, what I like to do is when the user exits the menu, I'd like it to actually ask, it chooses exit from the menu. I'd like it to actually ask the user if they really want to exit the application or not. And if they do want to exit the application, then go ahead and exit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create another method here. And we're just going to call this I'm going to make this return a Boolean value, true or false, whether the user chose they want to exit or not. We'll just call this our closing question. And I'm going to have this return a simple question. Message box dot show exit, are you sure? Now you'll notice that when as I type in this comma here, my dialog box changes for this message box.show. And we have 21 different overloads, or 21 different variations of this message box.show method that allows us to show different items. So you'll notice that this number 5 shows us the string text, which I have there, but it also allows me to specify a caption. So in this case, I'll just say exit application. So we have a caption that's going to display in the dialog box. The second parameter, or the third parameter, is the message box buttons. It's the buttons that I would like displayed. And you notice that when I hit the space bar, that brings up the option here to show me what message box buttons are available. In this case, I'm just going to choose both the yes and the no button. And interestingly enough, if I hit comma and space again, we have another one that pops up. In this case, the icon, so I can actually have it display an icon, or I can have it simply end it right there. In this case, we'll go ahead and choose an icon. We'll just make it a question mark. Actually, let's make it a stop since they're exiting the app, so we'll give them a little stop sign. And then the last one is, what is the default button? In our case, we have the yes-no button, so let's make the second button, which is the no button, the default. So if they just hit enter without asking, it's simply going to display if they hit enter, it's simply going to choose the no automatically. Now that I have that dialog box defined, I'm actually going to compare the result. And this is something that we haven't seen before. We've always seen the dialog box display a message, but we've never been able to respond to that. To display to it, all I'm going to do is check to see which button was clicked. In our case, we're just going to look at the dialog results and check to see if the yes button was clicked or the no button was clicked. In our case, we're going to check to see if the no button was clicked. And if that is the case, basically what it's going to do is it's going to return whether the no button was clicked or not. Okay. So we do have the option. Actually, I'm missing a parenthesis there. We do have the option of saying, actually, I do want to do. Oh, you know what I'm missing here? I'm missing this one. Let's do that. There we go. So in this case, what I have is it's displaying a dialog box with the yes or no, and we're checking to see if the no was checked. Because if the no is checked, then we want this to return true, that they are not sure. So in that case, we have this application exit. If I wanted to, I could simply call this method inside here and actually tell it, hey, the application is exiting. Is this really what you want to do? But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to trap not only this menu exit item being clicked, but I'm also going to check the control box close as well as the actual close button on the form. So in our form here, we've got various ways of closing it. Somebody clicked on this, they chose close, or if they clicked on the X, they chose closed, or if they just hit Alt F4. In any of those cases, I would like it to ask the user if they really want to exit. To do that, I'm going to choose the lightning bolts, in other words, the events for this form, and I'm actually going to go up to one called Form Closing. This is an event, you don't want closed because it's already happened at that point, but Form Closing. And if we choose that, I can double click on this, and I can then choose in my Form Closing event to actually handle whether this form actually closes or not, because we can actually cancel it out with this event. The form closing event args actually allows me to specify a cancel property, and if we look at that, cancel, if I specify the value is equal to true, then that will cancel the closing of the form. So in other words, if I set this to true, it would never be able to close. But instead, I'm going to call my method that I just asked, the closing question. And remember, this is going to return kind of the opposite. It's checking to see if it's a no. If it's a no, then this value is going to be true. In other words, we're going to cancel the closing of this application. And now, regardless of how we close the app, whether we use the application exit, whether we use the close, or the Alt F4, in all of those cases, we're going to fire this question off, and we're going to be able to cancel that event. So let's go ahead and run this. So now I can choose File, Exit, and I get my little dialog box, Exit, are you sure, with the red stop. If I say no, that cancels the event. It tells it, no, I do not want to close. But if I say yes, it's going to go ahead and exit out of it. If I then go back into it and rerun this again, you'll also see that no matter how we close it the other ways, we're always going to get that actual, that was an Alt F4, by the way. I just pressed Alt F4. And if I choose the control box close, we get the exit are you sure dialog box, and I can cancel out of that. So that's a way to override that behavior there. Really nice way to deal with that beyond just saying, application exit, are you sure? Okay, I got one question in the queue here. John's asking, is there an ability to add a newer style ribbon at the top menu? I assume when you say ribbons, you're talking about the Office ribbon controls. And the answer to that is yes. We have a ribbon SDK that is available that allows you to add those to use. These are not built into Windows Forms. That is an add-on library that you would add, but there is a way to do that. Okay, so let's talk about graphics. We'll wrap up the session with some more advanced features of Windows Forms. Windows Forms graphics are based on a technology that we call GDI+. Now what that means is that we have GDI is the graphics device interface. And that's the way we've always done graphics previous to the .NET Framework. Well, with the .NET Framework, we've changed it around a little bit, and we now have the mechanism called GDI+, so it's an upgrade to the old GDI. So basically what we have is an object that's called a graphics object, and typically we refer to it simply as G. That's the name of the object. Now, this object is an interesting little device. Basically, it allows you to get access to everything that your Windows Forms are drawing on the screen, and it allows you to add your own drawing functionality to it. Now, it's important to understand that graphics object is what we call stateless by design. What we mean by that is that once I give it a property, it doesn't know anything beyond what I've just given it. So I can't give it 4 or 5 properties in a row. It simply doesn't know those. So whenever I call a method on it, I have to pass in all the properties at one time on that method. And that's because of the nature of the way the graphics subsystems work. They're continuously rendering themselves. It's much more efficient to use a stateless design when you're doing this. For today, we're going to be dealing with pens and brushes. Pens and brushes are the items that we are going to use to allow us to draw on the screen. Now, you can think of it this way. A pen is something that allows you to draw lines on the screen. And a brush is something that allows you to fill in areas on the screen. Now, it's interesting that I'm going to be using pens and brushes interchangeably here, but if you think about it in that aspect, it's going to be pretty easy to understand. A pen is going to allow you to draw on the screen. A brush is going to allow you to fill in items on the screen or shade them or color them or whatever. Now, next week, we do have a session on Windows Forms controls, and we are going to be taking a look at a lot more of the advanced functionality of GDI+, things like anti-aliasing and alpha blending and the ability to deal with strings and know exactly what's going to get displayed on there. But in this demo here, I'm going to give you a quick little introduction to it, and hopefully you'll see some things that you can use in your own applications that will really make your application stand out. So let's go ahead and pop back over, and we'll do our last demo today. Over on my Windows form here, I've got, I'm going to go ahead and move this guy out of the way because he's currently, it's okay to have him there, but he might have, let's move him there, and we'll make it really small. That way he's not so in our way. It's still going to be there, but he's not going to be in our way too much. Okay, so now that I have my my Windows form positioned the way I want it, what I'm going to do is go back over to my code. Actually, let's go to the Windows form code and let me bring up one very, very important event that's going to happen whenever we want to draw something on the screen. I'm going to go down to the paint event. The paint event is the event that fires whenever my application wants to draw itself to the screen. Because that event is exposed through everything, I have the ability to add any of my own functionality to it at this point. Now you'll notice that we get a standard object, but we also get paint event args. The paint event args are pretty important to us because in this case, they're going to give us this E object, and this E object actually contains that graphics object that I was talking about. And we're going to use this graphics object to actually draw on the screen. So to do this, I'm going to actually set up my own graphics object. We're going to call it G, just like I said. And we're going to use the graphics object that was given to us through this event arg. So basically what the Windows form is doing is it's telling us it's giving us a surface to draw on, if you will. It's a canvas that it's handing us, and it's saying, hey, do all your drawing on here. And I'm going to call that canvas G. Now that I have my canvas, I can go ahead and start adding items to this. For example, I can take my graphics object and I can actually draw a line on here. And you'll notice that I have a whole bunch of different drawing methods that I can use here. In our case, I'm just going to say draw a line. And the first thing it's going to ask me, the first parameter that it requires is a pen. So I'm going to specify, we're going to create a new pen. And the only thing that's required in our pen is that it has a brush. So in our case, we're just going to use one of the standard brushes that are out there, and we'll just use one that's black. Now, what that basically did is I'm telling it, hey, my pen is going to be filled with black ink. And then I just give it a couple points. So point 1, we'll start at 1, 1, and the next one is a new point that we're going to end up at, what's 100? 100. So I have an XY axis of 1, 1, drawing to an XY axis of 100 and 100 with a pen that is black. So now when I go ahead and run the application, I should get a line that's diagonal and black. And there you can see my diagonal line is black. Now the file menu is kind of going over a little bit of it. Otherwise it would go all the way to this corner. but it's going all the way down to the 100.100. And you'll also notice that the clock is actually drawing over the top of this. So this label control is actually over the top of it. And that's a really, really simple drawing. We can get a little bit more complex. For example, if I wanted to, I could do an ellipse. And in our ellipse, pretty much the same things are going to apply here. So I'll create a new pen with a, let's make this on a yellow brush. Now, however, with the ellipse, we actually are going to specify, and you can see as the IntelliSense pops up, it's asking for a rectangle. So we'll just go ahead and create a new rectangle, and we'll go ahead and give it some sizes. So 30 by 300 by 200. So basically what that just did is that's going to create a yellow ellipse within the bounds of this rectangle. And there you can see my yellow ellipse. You'll notice that it's even gone outside of the form. It's completely okay to go outside of the form. When I change the size of the form, that ellipse stays in the exact position it's supposed to be in, and in fact it actually redraws itself every time. That's an important feature to understand. Every time I resize this, every time this form redraws itself, it redraws these items inside here. That's actually very, very, very important to understand. It does not remember anything from the previous drawings. You have to redraw it all yourself. So let's make this a little bit more advanced here. Let's actually add some text to this. So in our case, we can say draw text. Now, if I wanted to, I could actually just put a label out there and do whatever I wanted to. But text is nothing more than a drawing item as well. So anytime I display a label control or something like that, underneath the covers, it's actually using this kind of mechanism as well. So I can say hello world. And in this case, notice the parameters, what font do you want to use? So in our case, we're just going to create a new font object, giving it the Times New Roman font with the 25 dot pitch. It's asking for the brushes again, so we'll just go ahead and use the brushes. Let's make this some purple. And then the last thing is some kind of a point. Where do you want to locate this? But you also notice that it is a floating point. So we'll just say new point F, and we'll give it some location. So let's see, 150 by 150. We'll put it right there in the middle of everything. And there you can see my hello world in purple right in the middle of everything. All right, let's do one last thing. Now we've seen some really simple things. You've seen solid brushes that were black, yellow, and purple. Those brushes are basically very, very simple items. They're not displaying complex information. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to add a picture to this project. I'm going to add an existing item, and we'll pick a picture here. Let's see, image file, Skipper. I happen to have a picture of my plane, and I'm going to use that as a brush and apply that to some object. So to start off with, I need to tell it to, in my project, to go ahead and include this image when I actually build this project. So I'm just going to send a copy if this is newer. That's going to allow me to use that as a resource inside my object here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new brush. We'll call it B equals new brush. And actually what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a subset of this. I'm going to use a texture brush. And the texture that we're going to use is going to be that bitmap file, the skipper.jpg file. So we'll just type skipper.jpg as the brush we're using itself. And in this case, I need to actually spin it up in an image from a bitmap. So what I now have is an image file, or an image object that's loaded from this image file, and I'm using that image as the texture for a brush. If I wanted to, I could move this to the top here, and I could overlay all of these. But let me just go ahead and draw a small window. Let's do another ellipse. But in this case, instead of saying draw the ellipse, I'm actually going to fill an ellipse. So So we have draw and fill. Draw draws the outline of it. Fill actually fills it in with something. So in this case, let's just use a very simple one. First property is going to be the brush itself. And then the second property is going to be a rectangle. And I can actually specify, by the way, 640 by 480. I can actually hard code it right in just like that as well. And that will give me my rectangle as well. So here I'm creating an ellipse. It's going to be, 640 by 480. So it's going to be an ellipse, pretty good size. But I'm going to use this image as the background for that ellipse, or as the brush itself. Oops. I made a little mistake there. What did I do? Brush, brush, brushes. There we go. IntelliSense got me. And there you can see my image is an ellipse, 640 by 480. Does a nice width, does the nice clipping at the top because we have the menu at the top. I told it to start my ellipse in the very corner here. I could have moved it around, and I could even use that and move that around. Notice that the control actually overlays it, and we actually see if you take this code and you run it at home. I don't know if the live meeting is catching that, but as I re-scroll this, you actually see the purple Hello World text underneath this rectangle right here that allows us to actually see that it is drawing that control every single time we do that. So the Hello World text still exists, but because I drew that Hello World text underneath of this image, then it's going to show that way. If I wanted to, I could just take this and place that on top, and now the Hello World text you'll see will actually be on top of that control as well. And there you can see that Hello World text is actually on top of it. So I've been able to do that right on top of the image. If I used a text box, we would have a border around that, and a label would actually have a border around that as well, unless I set the transparency. So in this case, we have a really nice mechanism where I can annotate images and do some pretty advanced things with this. All right. So hopefully that gives you a little idea of what you can do with Windows Forms beyond what we've typically seen in our sessions. Next week, like I said, we're going to take that a step further. We're going to talk about how we can actually utilize GDI Plus, just like you saw me do there, to actually advance our controls themselves. So if you look at last week's session where we talked about web controls, we're going to do the same thing with Windows Forms controls, but we're going to make them really stand out, make them odd-shaped, and take on some new features that we haven't seen in the past by utilizing some of the advanced graphics functionality within Windows as well. I want to thank you for attending this webcast, just like all of the others. My contact information is here. And don't forget, next week we have the control session. I will be getting to your questions in just a second. We have the John's going to be bringing up the survey results for you, and I will be getting to those questions while you're doing the survey. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and get them in the Q&A panel, and I will be answering those while you guys are filling out the survey. John?
Great. Thanks so much. Okay, very quickly, a couple of things I want to go through. I'm sure that if you've been with this series for all 16 previous, we've gone through this before, so I'll go very quickly through it. Evaluation is coming up. Very important information to us, so if you could take a moment and let us know what you thought of the podcast, of the webcast, we'd really appreciate it. And I did want to remind everybody that the promotion for the drawing for the Zune digital media player is still in effect, so please submit an evaluation and throw your name into the hat for that drawing. Our entire catalog of webcasts is available at www.microsoft.com webcasts. You'll be able to find all of our upcoming webcasts. You'll be able to register for the remaining webcasts in this series if you have not done so already. Plus, you'll be able to find all of the webcasts that have been in this series that have already completed. The recordings are at that location as well. So go ahead and check that out. If you have any webcast content ideas, let us know. We may want to make a webcast out of your ideas, so let us know what you'd like to see. That's a long URL, so I'm not going to read it, but I'll remind you that you can go to the File menu and select Print to PDF at this time, and that will give you a local multi-page PDF document on your computer, which will give you a reference back to all of the URLs that were pushed out during this webcast. And last of all, today's webcast was presented using Microsoft Office Live Meeting. This is a great collaboration tool. If you're not currently using it with your business, you can give it a try for free for 14 days, and that demo can be accessed at www.microsoft.com/presentlive. I'll go ahead and push out that evaluation. So the evaluation that is loading on your screen is actually the evaluation launch page, is what I should call it. If you would like to launch an evaluation that is already filled out with data that you entered when you registered for this webcast, it will save you a little time. You'd want to select the registered online link. If you prefer to start with a completely blank evaluation, you'd want to use the all other registrants link. And so I'm going to go ahead and leave this up on the screen. If anybody has any questions about the evaluation or issues with submitting the evaluation, just go ahead and turn your C code to red, and I will come into a chat and try and help you through it. Bill, do you want to? Do you have any final words, or do you want to respond to any additional questions?
Yep. Kevin just asked a question. He said, "Can you change the Z order of your drawing object?" And actually, you saw me do that in my code there. Simply by changing the order in which you're drawing. You can change the Z order of it. In the paint event, it's literally just the order in which you draw those that they're going to get rendered. So there really isn't any other way of doing that with GDI Plus, at least from that point of view. So just simply the order of it. And Robert, thank you for attending. That's all I have in the questions.
All right, very good. Well then. If there is nothing else, if there are any last-minute questions, we will be on for the next couple of minutes, and we can text answers back to you. But for now, since we don't have any additional questions, we'll go ahead and close down the audio portion of this webcast. I want to give a special thank you to William Steele for continuing to bring these the great webcasts in the series to us. And I want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. We wouldn't these would be very disappointing to us if we didn't see you at the webcast. So we're always happy to see you online, and we do hope to see you online for the remaining webcasts in this series and for other webcasts that we offer. Hope everybody has a great day, and we'll see you online next time.